Good evening, guys, and welcome to another awesome, obviously, episode of Triggered. I want to thank you guys all again for supporting this show week after week. We're continuing to grow and continuing to reach more people eager to hear real news and the truth and not just be indoctrinated by the noise of the mainstream media and the political elites who have been feeding you your news for the last few decades. That's why I'm excited about tonight's episode. One of the most important America First voices is joining us today. Raheem Kassam. He runs the National Pulse and has a long history in populist politics, like predating MAGA as one of Nigel Farage's key consultants and really just friends during the whole role in Brexit. So we're going to start by getting into all of the big breaking news, including more lunacy surrounding the Alvin Bragg baseless Trump indictment nonsense. But first, let's talk about Joe Biden using his first veto. Joe Biden literally this week issued his first veto of his presidency to stop a bipartisan anti-ESG bill, which stands for Environmental and Social Governance. In other words, they want to take your money to promote woke bullshit, and even Joe Biden's Democrat-controlled Senate was against it because, of course, that's not going to be good for your retirement savings. The point of the bill was basically to stop a new Labor Department rule that encouraged woke investment for retirements, because we've seen how well that's worked out in the last couple of weeks, right? Just look at Silicon Valley Bank. How'd the woke investments there work out? How'd the improv actors on the board with no actual banking experience, how'd that work out? Well, even the Democrat-controlled Senate, obviously passed the Republican House, but even the Democrat-controlled Senate didn't want to require, essentially, your money to be invested in woke garbage. But Joe Biden vetoed it. And of course, Biden lied and claimed that the bill would risk your retirement savings by making it illegal to consider risk factors. MAGA House Republicans don't like that. I believe he called out Marjorie Taylor Greene in name in this. But in reality, Biden wants you to have to consider environmental and social justice factors when investing, instead of just doing what's best for your portfolio, for your retirement, for your returns, It's not about anything other than that, guys. You have to consider those things. You have to look at that. If the environmental stuff isn't the best return for you, well, we'll put you in it anyway, because as long as you're funding their woke bullshit, who really cares what happens to your retirement? Then we'll put you on a government-funded program when you can't afford to do anything. You'll be a Democrat voter for life. Why do Democrats want to play woke games with people's retirements, with their savings? They've worked for their whole lives for these things, and they want you to have to be in there, to have to play that game. Who cares how it works out? It's insane. Well, apparently, John Kirby said that LGBTQ rights are a core part of our foreign policy. I believe this guy used to be like an admiral, But National Security spokesperson John Kirby laid out the Biden administration's foreign policy agenda yesterday, and he made it clear. LGBTQ rights are a core part of their foreign policy. Watch this clip and see for yourself.
And President Biden has been nothing but consistent about his foundational belief in human rights, and LGBTQ plus rights are human rights. And we, again, back to the earlier question, are never going to shy away, be bashful about speaking up for those rights and for individuals to live as they deem fit, as they want to live. And that's something that's a core part of our foreign policy, and it will remain so.
What exactly does that even mean? Does that show strength to our adversaries like Russia and China? Does that show we're serious about actually winning conflicts in the future? Does that show any sort of strength? No. We're leading with weakness. And while we're leading with weakness, and again going with the woke bullshit talking points that have nothing to do with the job at hand, Putin and Xi are meeting to boost their relationships. Because this week, China's President Xi and Russia's President Vladimir Putin met to boost their economic ties. I mean, right, what could be worse than this at this moment, right? We're in a war, we're in a proxy war with Russia, we're playing dangerous games on the brink of World War III, which in my opinion only Trump can stop because he's the only one that wants to and the only one that's not profiteering from the escalation that we've seen over this. But at the same time that meeting has happened, President Xi of China and Vladimir Putin of Russia strengthening their ties. The Biden team is meeting with the cast of the show Ted Lasso to talk about a mental health initiative. Hey guys, mental health is important. Okay? Guess what? It's not as important as stopping thermonuclear war. Okay? So while Russia and China are strengthening their ties, the Biden administration is focused on something, let's say, a little less important. Optics matter, folks. What message does all of this send to the rest of the world? We're meeting with the cast of a sitcom while Russia and China are meeting to strengthen their alliance, right? Make no mistake about it. China's trying to take over the world. They're partnering with guys all over the place. They want to get with Saudi and they want to be able to make our petrodollars into the yuan. And then all the nice creature comforts America gets funding their woke bullshit because we're borrowing trillions that our children will eventually have to pay back or not be able to pay back, which is a whole nother story. You got to wonder what's going on. If you're China, you have to love the Biden presidency. Like, it's the greatest thing in the world that could have happened. China's ramping up its aggression while Biden is focused on everything but Beijing and their plans to take over the world. Joe Biden is a president who is totally unconcerned with two of our biggest adversaries becoming more aligned. Doesn't seem, I don't know, like, does that not seem like a big deal? I think it is. I think it does. So now we go back to the sham indictment of Trump, and now Ron DeSantis takes another shot at Trump. So I guess for our last news before we get to Raheem, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, who's been abusing his power for months while going slack on actual criminals, is pursuing the indictment of my father. We've been reading about it all this week. And like we told you on Monday, these far-left Soros DAs are hell-bent on weaponizing the justice system against their political enemies. We've been watching it now for like 8 years under Trump, right? They've been trying to throw him. I know, I did 50 hours of testimony for treason, a crime punishable by death. Me, in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee, the House Intelligence Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, the January 6th Commission. Like, they've been trying to do this stuff against my whole family for 8 years. Nothing against Biden, nothing against the family that's taking $1 billion investment from China, all sorts of payoffs from China, direct money. I know that Haley Biden is a great Chinese investor and someone that would merit taking a lot of money for nothing, just like Hunter took a lot of money for no-show jobs in Ukraine and money laundered for Russian oligarchs. But none of that is news, folks. You can't even look at it. But they don't care about the facts or the law. This is all about personal destruction. They want to go after any of their enemies. This case hinges on bizarre, unfounded legal theories about campaign finance law that even the experts are scratching their head on. And beyond that, there's like a statute of limitations that's also run out, but, minor details. The time has run out to try this so-called novel legal theory, but again, who really cares when you don't actually want to follow the laws of the land? But when you're a radical prosecutor who's trying to curry favor inside the Democrat Party and suck up to your donors like George Soros, none of that ever matters. And perhaps Just as big of an issue was some of the weak Republican response from alleged conservatives like Ron DeSantis who think the whole thing is a non-issue. Because yet again, Governor DeSantis is showing just how unprepared he really is for the threats that the country is facing. He's not ready for the big leagues if you don't think that this is one of the biggest issues of our time and you're not willing to engage in it, right? I understand a lot of his billionaire sort of establishment donors and the people like Karl Rove and Paul Ryan and George Soros, who was talking about how he's going to be the guy. I mean, I get that they want him going after Trump, but for our people, guys, if you don't think they're going to weaponize this against you one day, you haven't been watching. Of all people, I guess Ron decided to sit down with Piers Morgan. Watch the clip for yourself.
Which is your favourite nickname that Trump's given you so far? Is it Ron DeSanctimonious or Meatball Ron?
Well, I can't.
I think even he went off Meatball Ron.
I can't. I don't know how to spell DeSanctimonious. I don't really know what it means, but I kind of like it's long. It's got a lot of vowels. I mean, so we go with that. That's fine. You can call me whatever you want. I mean, just as long as you also call me a winner, because that's what we've been able to do in Florida is put a lot of points on the board and really take this state to the next level.
As the radical Democrats are indicting my father and destroying the fabric of our nation, DeSantis, pathetically, is turning not only to the establishment media, but foreign media in order to form his rhino handlers and help him go after the America First movement. Again, I'd love for this stuff to not be happening, and I've been silent. I haven't attacked him, even if they've got sort of the influencers going after Trump for the last few years. You don't see that, right? Everyone, DeSantis has never attacked Trump. Relax, just watch what his people do. Doing it de facto doesn't mean it's not happening, right? It's just weakness, though, to take this approach, plain and simple. The political instincts just aren't there yet. Now, maybe they grow, but it's hard to teach instinct when it comes to these things. And now we really have to ask ourselves, was he just faking it the whole time? There's the stuff like, he would have fired Fauci. Just go look at all the things that he did. Is there any actual evidence that he would have Fauci? Did he come out against him at the time? No. It's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback and after the fact say all the things he would have done when it's politically expedient. But we see the tweets. Go look at my Instagram post. Here he is, supporting the jab in Publix, wearing a mask, greeting Trump while wearing a mask when no one else is wearing a mask. Was he ever really that much of a MAGA guy, or was it just convenient for the establishment? I don't know. I'd love to believe that wasn't the case, but in looking at what we've seen in the last week, doesn't seem to help. I guess he's losing ground because people are starting to wake up to it. A new Morning Consult poll shows Trump at 54% and DeSantis at 26%. This guy is a puppet of the swamp. Fortunately, everyone seems to be waking up to it. It's just the facts, folks. Remember, when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. And at a time like this, that actually matters. Okay? That actually matters. And it's a shame. There's a reason I've been quiet, because I want to believe that we have a better bench than perhaps we do. But hopefully we can take the next few years to learn about that people can learn and understand the threat that we're truly up against, and then we can truly combat it. So again, guys, before we get to Raheem, let's be honest, it takes guts to support a show like this, because I'll go after everyone and call it how I see it. So that can be controversial, that can get you canceled, but that's why I want to take the time to tell you about Goldco. Gold and silver can protect your retirement savings from inflation and dollar devaluation. Owning tangible physical and inflation hedging gold and silver can help diversify your portfolio. We've seen it, guys. We've watched what's going on in the markets. Banks are collapsing, not just in America, but around the world. Okay? So from precious metal IRAs to direct purchase of a gold and silver, Goldco has helped thousands of Americans diversify and protect their retirement savings. Support companies who support you. That's like a key tenet of this show, guys. We got to do that instead of the woke companies that hate your guts and will use your money to fund you. So if you're looking to hedge, to diversify your portfolio, go to donjrgold.com to learn more. That's DONJRGOLD.com. Okay? Support patriotic companies. And speaking of patriotic companies, time to also support MyPillow. okay? And it's why I want to tell you about My Pillow 2.0, where you can go and buy and get one free with promo code mypillow.com/Don Jr. Buy one, get one free. Mike Lindell, great patriot. They've gone after him. They've canceled him from the major retailers that are woke corporate because he's willing to fight. And you got to respect that, guys. You got to respect the people who are willing to actually fight, not just roll over when it's easy to do so. So because the best pillow is getting even better with Mike Lindell's patented adjustable fill, it's going to give you the exact support you need from the bed to your head. And it's going to stay that way throughout the night. So go to mypillow.com/Don Jr. where you can buy one and get one free as well as get a bunch of discounts on all your other favorite My Pillow products. And with that, guys, we're going to go over to Raheem Kassam, and we're going to have a pretty lit interview. Thanks a lot. Guys, we're here now with my buddy Raheem Kassam from the National Pulse, good friend, and a guy that was really, really, really early in the populist movement, like actually before MAGA. Now, I don't want to give him too much credit. I'm sure he'll take some himself. but Raheem, talk a little bit about that. Give people, I think a lot of my fans are going to know, obviously, who you are, your work with Nigel Farage and Brexit. But give us a little bit of an insight into that. And then I want to sort of compare and contrast the movements as well as sort of where they've gone.
Well, thank you for having me. And thank you for asking that question, because I think the thing I like to try and tell people right now in America is how similar the Republican apparatus, the establishment GOP, how similar it looks to the Conservative Party, the Tory Party in Britain that I left in 2009-10 to support Nigel and his party, the UK Independence Party. And that's how we kind of broke away from the establishment norms and did something over the next several years, that led to a global changing arrangement in Britain's relationship with the European Union, and all of the knock-on effects that will occur from that. And I look at the, I'm here on Capitol Hill, and so I get to see it every day, and I get to live it every day. And I see so much of the similarities between the establishment conservative movement here now and then in England, and it's horrifying. If you want your country to look like what the United Kingdom looks like today in 5 to 10 years' time, then go ahead. Keep choosing the same establishment candidates and so forth. But as I always say, there is one movement, and in particular, I think him, one man that I find can arrest that particularly well. And that's why I've been banging on about it since I first saw him in Vegas in 2015 at Freedom Fest.
Wow.
That this is our guy. This is our guy. Yeah. By the way, people don't know this. I was the one who convinced Steve Bannon that Trump was our guy. Steve was, and the Breitbart machine was on the cruise train very early on, and I was one of his deputies, and I just kept hammering him. And there's a whole long story behind it, but one day he turned to me and he just went, I think you might get your Trump thing after all.
That is amazing. But so talk a little bit about that, because I mean, you're talking about the establishment, and honestly, it's been sort of an interesting week or 10 days, even 2 weeks, watching sort of the establishment do its thing, in my opinion, to try to capture, like, we're going to morph into MAGA, even if it's not really MAGA, even if it's just for votes. Did you see that in the UK? What are your thoughts of what that's doing in America, where they're trying to be MAGA, but then they end up showing their true colors and where they really are? Because that manipulation is perhaps what's most disturbing about politics, right? Because you think someone's on your team, you think someone's actually doing what you want as a voter, as a working class American who wants to put America first, all the tenets of the MAGA movement. But some people seem like they're being appealing to that, but then they're not. Then they're doing the opposite. Talk a little bit about that. Did you see that in the UK? The infiltration of that movement by the establishment, who's so concerned about losing their power?
Yeah, well, nerds will remember that the 2010 election in the United Kingdom was particularly strange because it led to a hung parliament, no overall majority in government, and the Conservative Party that I was a part of, that I was, if people look back, they'll see me sitting behind David Cameron at rally speeches, a very young me and a very young David Cameron. And as soon as that election was over, the Tories had nothing but to go into a coalition governance deal with the Liberal Democrat Party. I mean, that is a party to the left of your Democrats. That is a party to the left of, in a lot of ways, to the left of the Labour Party in Britain. And so immediately everything changed, right? The claims of authenticity, about putting British interests first, about lowering immigration, border control, about bringing crime down, like all of these red meat promises all politicians know how to throw out, but very few know how to follow up on, were tossed out of the window immediately. The day the coalition deal was signed, and the day that David Cameron and Nick Clegg, who's now over at Meta, by the way, walked into Downing Street together, hand in hand. And so I've seen it all the time. That was Westminster, right? We refer to Capitol Hill in America. Westminster is what we refer to as the political scene in London. And I saw that in Westminster all of the time. There was only one guy who tickled my attention when I would see him at pubs in and around Westminster, and that was Nigel Farage. And the difference is authenticity. It's always authenticity.
Yeah.
And a lot of that isn't science, right? It's trust your gut kind of stuff. And I think you're seeing that now here too, right? People know what their gut is telling them about so many of these people who are bad mouthing, the man who put everything on the line for this country for the last several years, longer than that even. And so you got to trust your gut and trust your instincts and what your instincts are telling you about these people and what their plans might be.
Yeah, I mean, give us your thoughts about the last sort of 2 weeks, because it's sort of been, very interesting that some of the people, again, that you would have said, hey, that's a great, someone, in line certainly for let's call it the MAGA throne, if we're going to use British, sort of analogies, but, sort of running to that, in my opinion, sort of the Karl Rove, Paul Ryan, establishment and really the billionaire donor class of conservatism. And I think that's, again, I think a lot of those people are very happy to sort of, use the mantle of MAGA republicanism to get what they want. But are they really ever going to be tough on China if they can get their widget for half a cent less? And the answer is probably not, in my opinion. But I'd love your thoughts on it, because it's been a sort of telling week. I have been really quiet on a lot of the stuff that I've seen, even over the last few months, because I actually believe in this shit, right? I want there to be a deep, MAGA bench. Because I have 5 kids and I want to leave them a country that, I understand, that I believe in, that believes the things that, we all believe. And I think even my eyes continue to be opened on a daily basis.
Well, look, I mean, the last couple of days I've been in London, not in London, in DC and New York. And I went up to New York to watch the NYYRCs put together, that's the New York Young Republicans, put together their protest down in downtown Manhattan, and I am relatively new to New York in the sense that I get to spend a couple of weeks there every year for only the last couple of years, and I'm always finding new neighborhoods and new areas, and I'm on my feet as often as possible. But I also feel like I know, I get it now, right? Especially as a Londoner, we have competing cities, right?
Yes.
And I kind of get it. I understand it's rebellion and it's artistry and it's boo to the corporate state, except it's not boo to the corporate state now. It's yay, the corporate state.
It's bow to the corporate state. Right.
It's like, hey, good, the corporate state is politically prosecuting the people who I disagree with. Yay. Can you imagine if you walked up to a microphone with those people in Zuccotti Park in 2009 and told them, hey, you realize in 12, 13 years, you'll be cheering on the corporate state persecuting a political person. And they say, no way in hell, I would never sell out like that, man. It would be all of that. And
by the way, the Occupy Wall Street crowd, it's sort of interesting. I feel like a lot of what they believe is actually so much more MAGA than they would ever allow themselves to believe, in terms of there is a difference between being pro-America for the little guy. I mean, MAGA was always about the little guy, right? It was always fighting against the corporate interest if they're taking advantage of the little guy. Now, if the little guy is able to benefit, that's great, but that's not what it is. That's why the border issue is so critical, right? It's why the China issue is so critical. And that's where the establishment, pretend MAGA, the guys who sort of tried to commandeer the movement for themselves, like that's where they fail it, in my opinion, because they're all about those other interests because they can make a couple more bucks on it.
Yeah, and I think I also think more even at a granular level when you think about capitalism. No offense, present company acknowledged, but capitalism isn't bulldozers and shiny buildings necessarily, right? Capitalism is the deployment of resources where they're best used, and that is dictated by the people, right? And so there's a massive. Obviously, they always talk about democracy, our democracy, our democracy. There is the most democratic part of Western society is, ostensibly, apart from the vote, and we can talk about that, but it's where you get to put your money, right? It's where you get what you get to back, what you get to buy, what you get to do with it. These are all things within your gift and within your choice. And so I always think to myself, MAGA is more hippie than people realize, actually, because it's as much development and future future-oriented stuff and prosperity-oriented stuff as it is like they pave paradise and put up a parking lot, right? Like it's the balance between those two things. That's why MAGA's different. That's why people run as MAGA candidates are different.
In 2016, that was sort of the actual big thing, which was like which way some of the people who are now like ultra MAGA, they were Bernie voters. I mean, that was sort of the great section of those people because they got that it was about the little guy that was totally underrepresented by both Democrat and, establishment and Republican establishment. And that was a big thing. And you talk about capitalism. I'd actually love to hear your thoughts because this felt like to me I don't think you heard my intro a few minutes ago, but, talking about Joe Biden using his first veto to shut down an anti-ESG bipartisan bill because maybe it's not the best investment for your retirement savings. But we're going to force you to, put your retirement savings into woke bullshit. Did you see this one? And what are your thoughts on it? Because this seems like, bordering like anti-American, and especially to override the Democrat Senate, which passed this bill, is sort of interesting. And yet it's getting no attention from almost anyone. I imagine National Pulse will cover it, but certainly no one else is really talking about how crazy this is.
Yeah, and I'm cognizant of the fact that I sort of skipped over your last question about the last few days, and I wanted to talk about the protests in New York and why that was important, and all of the circus surrounding that stuff as well. But in direct response with that, this is it now, right? Everything is political. Everything must be political or nothing exists, right? Everything has to be tweaked at the very minimum and contorted out of its senses if they really got their way. I was walking around yesterday, Soho, and I walked past the New School. I never heard of the New School. Some people now have told me that it's quite a big thing. It's been a big thing for a while, but I'd never come across it. And I looked at the outside of it, and all of the glass and the thing says, studies about fascism and activism as artistry and like all of this. These are the courses that they're offering, right? And then I looked at the people walking around the New School, and I was like, okay, all the dudes are in dresses, all the chicks have green hair, and I was like, these are the people who are supposed to be in the jobs that dictate, that are going to get appointed to these corporate boards, where they have these ESG stuff, where they have these mandates and all of that. And I just thought to myself, man, it's kind of beyond salvation down here.
100%. And listen, we witnessed that last week, right? We witnessed that last week when, Silicon Valley Bank, with their wonderful array of artists and improv comics, on the board of a major bank, like a top 20 bank, just goes under. Well, like how many? And I was like, well, how many people had actual banking experience on the board? And the answer was one. Like think of how fucking insane that is.
And I don't think it was particularly good banking experience.
No, and the other guy that was in charge was like the head of Lehman Brothers. So like, I don't know, probably not the best. But again, there doesn't seem to be consequence if you're willing to do that woke stuff, So, I mean, listen, I think if these are going to be the elite minds of the future, we got to be looking elsewhere because you see that every day. You saw what they did to Charlie Kirk at universities. God knows, I've spoken at a bunch of universities with Charlie Kirk. The universities, we've had one. I think we pre-sold like 13,000 tickets at a pretty major university, and they gave us a room that held 1,000 people. Like because of course, like we can't allow that thought to even happen. on a college campus. Now, again, some of those could have been protesters, and that's fine. We were still there. We were willing to put up our ideas versus theirs. But, they like to talk about fascism, but they couldn't possibly hear a dissenting opinion without losing their minds, having to run to their safe spaces. And that is what's actually scary when we're putting these people forward as the great minds of the future. It's like, well, what are they capable of? Regurgitating what someone else told them that is the gospel?
But Don, what you've just described is the process by which politburos are created, right?
Yeah.
These people will leave their colleges and universities. They will enter corporate boards. Those boards will necessarily be tied to politics, the state, and their philosophical ideas, or what they've been told their philosophical ideas must be. And that's it. That's total control. That's the state corporate nexus that they were supposed to have studied. It was outside, it was etched on the wall of the new school when I walked past it. The studies of fascism, that's what they were supposed to have rejected, right? And they are being frog marched into it wholesale. I mean, wholesale.
Well, the worst part is they think
they're mutilating their bodies. They want to be a part of this thing, right?
Oh yeah, like a trans kid is the latest Hollywood accessory, right? It's like a nice, pair of Gucci shoes or something like that. It's like, we got to have the trans kid. It's like, it's lunacy. But again, the things, they don't even realize that they're actually pushing fascism, not preventing it. And I mean, my background, sort of my early political leanings is my mom escaped communist Czechoslovakia. Like, I understand these systems. I used to go there as a kid in the summers with my grandfather because he saw what we had in the United States of America, and he wanted me to understand how blessed we were. These guys think we're a dictatorial regime. I mean, we're getting that way because of the people that they're supporting. But like, have they been anywhere else in the world? Have they gone to an actual fascist regime? I'd love to see them try to push some of the ideas that they can freely push in America. Like, go do it in China.
Right.
Like, see what happens. It'll work out great for you. You should do that. I want to buy these people like a one-way ticket to the socialist utopia of their choice around the world and see just how well they do there, because it ain't what they think it is. And that's scary.
Right. And this is the thing, we're grown up enough politically to realize that there's no functional difference between communism and fascism in the way it treats the citizenry. Right. And they don't see it like that. They only see one side of it as bad, and the other side is just misunderstood and it's never been tried and whatever. But I want to just hone in on this point, right? Again, just to put a fine point on this. They are mutilating their own genitals and mutilating their own bodies, but a red baseball cap is a cult.
Of course. And they don't even see the analogy. Like, they don't see that, like, one is clearly more extreme than the other, and that they won't look at, these are the people that we heard about, trust the science. Like, well, what's the science on recidivism for people who have done this to their body when they wake up and they get out of their indoctrination and they're like, holy shit, maybe I'd like to have a kid. Maybe I'd want to do these things. Maybe I want to live. I mean, I believe it's in like the 90s. Like 90% of people, like, when they have a chance to go back and like they go through whatever they're going through, and I'm sure, as youth, we've all had that, but that they're preying on youth, kids as young as 3, they want them to be able to make these decisions. That kid can't buy a fucking pack of cigarettes for 15 years, but like, you can chop your dick off and it totally, like, what could go wrong? Like,
I remember they did this with a whole generation of girls with bulimia. Right? They just popularized bulimia. It was on the magazine covers, all of that. And then suddenly everybody had bulimia. Well, whatever happened to that?
Well, did you see the statistics? I saw it was something like, it was like 2-3 weeks ago in the news. It was like all these, women and kids, they were doing like the statistics, and like, it was like 50% of like women out there identified as bisexual. And yet during the pandemic, none of them actually had a bisexual relationship. Because like, you're a little bit less, and it was like, well, do you think that maybe they were never actually there? But there was literally a social benefit to being bisexual. And what, like, you weren't actually, but like, it was literally easier. Like, to me, it doesn't feel like that class today, they want to and try to invoke their, minority status these days. But I actually feel like they're the popular ones. It's not a disadvantage. It's actually a huge advantage to say that you're these things these days. And yet they play up sort of that minority status of it. I don't know which way it goes, but it certainly seems like these days, if you're in the military and you check the box that you're trans, like you could be an admiral in like 2 or 3 days. Just go ahead. I had Ronnie Jackson on last week, who was an actual admiral, and he said as much. It's crazy to see how far it's gone.
Yeah, I agree, and it's one of these things where at this point you sort of have to laugh about it because it's so tragic, right?
Yeah. You have to laugh about it until you realize what it's doing.
Oh,
to me, it feels like it's a Chinese psyop, right? Like we popularize this stuff on TikTok. We make kids do what it's to me, it's like the fentanyl crisis in the sense that you're demoralizing a population. Again, if we believe the recidivism rates, and I'm looking at numbers, and what does that do to that person for life?
Oh, it's done. That's it.
It's over, and you got to deal with it. It's truly scary.
Yeah. No, I don't mean to make light of it. I just mean, we come across this stuff in such extreme forms, every step of the day now, that it's hard not to look at this level of like wanton self-inflicted human tragedy and sort of throw your hands up and chuckle. It's something you couldn't even envisage 25 years ago, right? If you had told somebody 25, let alone tell the founding fathers that this would be going on in America in 2023, tell somebody 25 years ago, hey, we've got mass dick chopping, going on around the country. You've got what? I don't even want to know why.
Listen,
it's
you've
wrong.
been in,
whatever reason you're doing it for, it's the wrong reason.
You've been obviously on the forefront of that. You've been on the forefront of a conservative movement of populism. No, I'm not saying the dick chopping, but big if true. That would be big news if it turned out that was actually
I've been at the forefront of it.
you were at but you've been at the forefront of the battlefield. Right. So, talk about this. You got into this at a young age. You became a fixture in conservatism. Let's call it, I'll use that generally, right? Because I think it's probably more populist than conservative, perhaps even some libertarian, perhaps. But you're on the forefront of that battlefield. You grew up in it. How did you get into it? And then how have you seen sort of the rapid escalation, right? That the curve is just going up so crazy. Now, maybe that's good. Maybe that's what it takes to get the average conservative who's been live and let live, who believes in freedoms, who believes in it, to wake up and understand exactly what's going on, because they're just in line for the gulags. If this trend continues, that's not far off. And I'm not making that up because they're literally fucking saying it. How'd you get into it? How did that start? What are the changes that you've seen in the threat that we're up against?
Well, I was just a young, loudmouth. I had an opinion about everything when I was a kid, and
I know some people like that.
Yeah, and my mother would turn the television on, and I'd watch the news, and I'd have an opinion about that. And I remember at one point I was fixated by the first Gulf War, so fixated that my mother would turn the television on, and when Saddam was on the TV, she'd go, "Look, your friend is on TV." I'd say, "That's not my friend." And of course, we were all around the world. We were rocked by what happened on 9/11. We were shocked, glued to our televisions, finding out. I was actually up in one of the towers a year before that on vacation in Manhattan with my parents. This was the September of 2000, I think. And the world changed, and we were raised in a Muslim family, so I started to look deeper at what we were being taught, what we were told that we had to believe by these Salafist and Wahhabist preachers that were starting to come across. Right, they were big in France, big in England, and they were putting together groups of Islamist activity all over the country. So that's where I got started. Is actually,
and you get no credit for that, right? By the way, you get no credit for actually having an understanding of the mindset, having grown up in it. And by the way, the other big news of the day is that even your mom thought you were a fascist, apparently, with your love of Saddam. So, that may be a strike against you, but I'll vouch for you. You're totally good in my book, not a fascist.
I think it was just, I've always been a bath guy and not a shower guy. And I think she was saying I like the bath party because I was watching Saddam Hussein at the bath party. And in 2017, I actually went around Europe and I did a book. I went to all the Arab-dominated areas across Europe, and I did a book called No-Go Zones. It was actually a bestseller in 2017, did very well. And that's really where I got involved with meeting lots of members of parliament, members of Congress, talking at think tanks and so on and so forth. And over that period of time, between sort of 15 and 17 is when I really started to work with Nigel Farage a lot. And we, we saw migration in the United Kingdom go from the tens of thousands. I think it's now around 600,000 net a year, which is the size of a city in England, right? It's the size of a major city in England coming in every year. Well, people's healthcare is suffering, the infrastructure is creaking, the schools are suffering, and all of these problems that the left were like, oh, well, we need more money for the NHS and we need more money for education. UKIP, we were the ones going, yeah, but why do you need that? Like, why is this exponentially rising? And so a lot of the public came with us on that journey, on that intellectual journey that really crescendoed with Brexit, right? And it was in 2016, after Brexit happened, that Bannon moved to the campaign and told me to take over his radio show on Sirius XM that. So I stayed, and I've been in America since, and we rescued Human Events from irrelevancy, and that's now being very well run, and we've now got the National Pulse, and that's expanding over this next year, and now I've got the podcast and all of that stuff. But my favorite thing, honestly, Don, is traveling around the United States. I think I've done like 43 states now, is traveling around the United States, and I think I want to do a documentary about this year, telling the stories of people whose stories are ignored, right? Thinking about places like Lebanon, Kansas, that has, I think, 100 people left living there, and how it's been just gutted by globalism, and all of the people have left. And it was this, and there are so many of these examples around the country, and it doesn't have to be that way. And so my animosity towards China is born out of that. My animosity towards, people who aren't putting America first, who are Americans who are not putting America first, is born purely out of that. Like the suffering that you
I saw some of that myself.
I
saw some of that myself, and again, I understand fully where I come from and my background. But I went to a boarding school, sort of an elite boarding school, but it was in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, which was the home of Firestone Tires. Right. And like we go around the town, you see these decrepit factories. I was like, well, what happened? This was like a once thriving, area. Mrs. Smith's Pies was based, like it was this area, and then you see the rust. And so, I mean, that was one of the other things that started hitting me. But you mentioned going around the U.S. I was in the UK on the day of Brexit, and I had this incredible story. I'm not even sure I may have put it in my book Triggered, but I remember being there the day of, because we were opening up our golf course in Scotland up at Turnberry, and I remember being like, hey guys, what do you think? And I would talk to the Greens crew, right? Because I'd probably have more fun hanging out with those guys than I ever would the executive sort of guys, right? But obviously huge press was there because of, it was Trump going to the day of Brexit, everything. So I'm talking to the Greens guys like, what do you think's going to happen here, guys? Is it going to be close? They go, what are you talking about? It's over. Like, we're done. Like, we're out. Like, no way. Like, and then you talk to the press who are from the same area, who live in the same sphere. And they're like, I don't know anyone who would vote for that. Who would leave? Like, these are people living next to each other that had literally never had a conversation together. And I go, holy crap, what's going on here? Like, no one understands. And obviously, it went the one way, but, it was sort of very indicative of that, like, New York, DC, LA press bubble where they're like, I don't know a single Trump voter. How could that have happened? They learned quickly that was a real thing in 16. They weaponized that in 20, had to have to change the game to be able to win. We got to probably play that game to win going forward. But, it was amazing to see that and just really eye-opening, because it was like, wow, like how can there be this big a dichotomy? And like neither side could even fathom that there was maybe a middle ground.
Yeah, I like to be introspective in those moments and think to myself, well, the left was telling us how out of touch that we were when we were rah-rah booing over the Iraq invasion, which a lot of us were, right? Because like there was an enemy and it looked like a good thing to do. And so now I hope that when we look at the lessons that we learned from the left and how disconnected they are, how they don't want to talk to ordinary people. I was at a hotel, you might know it, not far away from here, just a few days ago. Used to have a different name, has a different name now. And a lot of the staff were telling me, oh, the liberals come here now, they don't talk to us, they don't tip, they don't shake our hands, they don't ask us how we are, how our day is, like any of that. And I just hope we learn the lessons and hold on to those lessons that we're learning. What the corporate left looks like. It's disgusting. They don't care about. Listen, we all understand progress, right? We all understand that some jobs will not exist on this earth forever. But the indignity with which they treat ordinary people, the indignity with which they treat their towns, their livelihoods, their families, the way they tell them, learn to code, hustle on, like all of this stuff. And look at this. Learn to code was a thing, 5, 6, 7 years ago now. The journalists are now being put out of their jobs.
And by the way, when you throw it back at them, when they lose their job, you get thrown off Twitter.
Yeah.
Right? You get thrown off Twitter for being like, but wait. Like, it was okay when they did it to a farmer because that guy's a lesser guy. But this guy's an elite person that went to an Ivy League school. And, who cares if they're writing for a journalistic rag that's not making any money or losing money? But, like, you tell them, hey, guys, maybe a good time to learn to code. And all of a sudden, now you're an insult. Now you're going to get banned for hate speech, hate crime. You're on an FBI watch list, just like a concerned parent who doesn't want their children to be indoctrinated, at a school board. Like, I mean, guys, like, we got to wake up. Like, this stuff is going on. It's very real. They threw that at us like it was the great insult that these people weren't capable. It turns out the journalist isn't capable of much either. And they sure as shit couldn't run a farm and actually take care of themselves or feed their families.
But I like to think that these journalists who are being put out of their jobs by ChatGPT, I like to think that one of the farmers 7 years ago went and learned to code, and then he coded ChatGPT, and now ChatGPT is putting all of journalists out of business.
Exactly. The difference is AI can't do farming yet. It just shows you that.
Exactly.
And by the way, maybe it can one day. Okay, and maybe that's where technology is going. But I'll say this: AI. Sure as shit learned how to replace a worthless journalist a lot faster than they did the farmers who those journalists felt were so much less than them, who were so comfortably ridiculing them as, MAGA idiots. So I think that's a lesson to learn. AI replaced them. It was the first thing they actually replaced. But the farmer still actually needed.
Tells you a lot about them, though, doesn't it? Because any smart person would have seen that coming. They would have gone, hold on a minute. What is one of the simplest things to do? Well, that is put pen to paper. You can be good at it, bad at it. But if you take the aggregate of human, knowledge, and you told the AI, hey, can you just churn out some copy about this latest news item? Chances are you're going to be able to do that. Chances are less that you're going to be able to serve the function of a farmer across a farm and all the different elements that go into that, right? But they don't think like that. For them, it's repetition of a corporate line. It's not actual intelligent thinking. Like, it's not futurist thinking. It's not philosophical thinking. It's just rote.
And that's why I think and you've been a leader on the forefront of this. I think the sort of the independent journalism away from sort of the corporate juggernaut is such an important thing, because like those guys actually are irreplaceable. There's some on the left, I don't imagine that Glenn Greenwald and I have probably a lot in common politically. And yet, like, I'm just psyched that a guy is willing to be like, hey, like, wait a minute, I'm leaving the institution that I founded because they're incapable of breaking away from the woke corporate leftist talking points. And like, we have to have these conversations. You've done that even from, more established conservative media to do your own independent stuff. And like, those guys are actually rare, and we have to nurture it because they actually are capable of sort of independent thought. Whereas everyone else is just like, you could read, the Atlantic and yada yada, the Independent on an issue, and it's literally like anyone could have written it. Here's the 7 talking points, rubber stamp by the DNC, and it's like, here's your article, congratulations.
Well, it's amazing, isn't it? Because who owns the Atlantic?
Exactly. Steve Jobs is widow. So she's worth a couple $100 billion, and she's a woman of the people from the left. She's fighting fascism with her $100 billion estate. Like, give me a fucking break.
What was Steve Jobs' mantra, right? It was here's to the crazy ones, right? It was being out there on the peripheries and pushing, being independent, pushing those boundaries, like doing something different, innovating a little bit. Maybe you might mess up a few times along the way, but you're doing something that is interesting, and it's artistic, and it's in other people's interests as well. And here then you have, the widow using that cash that was made from that philosophy to do what you just said, right? It's it's rehash staid talking points by the corporate machine. And I have my views about where Apple as a company has gone as well, but I just think that's so ironic. And it's all of the money that they made being intelligent and different. And it's like when you see Springsteen in the White House now with Biden, it's like, once upon a time I can see that was cool. That is the antithesis of cool now.
Yeah, like I feel like 1980s Bruce Springsteen would beat the shit out of like 2020s Bruce Springsteen. You know what I mean? It's like what happened? It's like you see it at all the Hollywood events. I'm like, I don't know, dude. Like that was like, for the record, that was the second concert I ever went to. It was like Born in the USA, and it was awesome. I actually still love a lot of his music because I'm capable of making the distinction between political and otherwise. But like the first was actually Michael Jackson's Thriller, so that's a whole nother topic. But like, I imagine at the time there was no one bigger in the world. That was like Beyonce, Jay-Z, plus the other, I don't even know, I'm like the worst pop culture person in the world, like combined as one. So
right. I was listening to Jungle Land just this morning, actually, which is a great song off that album. Which is, Springsteen would have no idea what's going on where that was, written about now. He wouldn't care.
Yeah, and that's what's sort of interesting is the flip of the parties, right? You saw the guys representing the working class. You saw that. So what did you see? Was there a parallel like that in the UK, or were just one side just sort of had enough? Because in us, you saw Joe Biden. The only thing he's been right about in like the two and change years he's been in office is like, who'd have thought that Republicans would be voting for like blue collar? They'd be getting those votes. Like, well, like they just, those blue collar guys have no representation from the people who claimed to represent them in the past. They scorn them. They look down on them. Like, of course they're going to flip.
Yeah, British culture is very different from American culture. They say we are, we're united by the common language, right? But we're such wildly different people, actually, and our political systems share some things, but culturally, it's Britain is very uncool, but in a cool way. Yeah. It's like we know that like at times we can be a little bit Mr. Bean, and at times we can be a little Basil Fawlty, and at times we, and we kind of lean into that kind of thing. But with Americans, the reason I loved America from the moment I set foot here as a child for the first time was everything in America. And I get, I suppose this is a perfect denouement for where this, or dovetailing for where this, where my life has come to so far, which is that America was like big and bold and brash and out there and in your face. And it was, smashing cans of beer together at the ball game and all of this. And you had all these cool television adverts. Do you remember the old, the Coors Light advert with the dancing cheerleader twins and all of that? That was, it was fireworks and it was jets over, head. And
the Swedish bikini team, because who cares about,
And you know what? It was Donald Trump, right? And it was all of that. And that was, that I thought was like the 80s, America, super cool. And listen, look at what they're doing culturally now with shows like Succession, right? They're trying desperately to like go back to a time when things were just a little bit more cool and a little bit more brash. And like, as much as you are supposed to dislike Logan Roy, you kind of love Logan Roy, right? Like,
Yeah, well, that's the sort of the interesting one is sort of, the attack on all of that, right? Like they've destroyed humor because you're not allowed to be funny because there's a microaggression hidden in everything. So they've drained. Like you have to think about everything. You can't say anything. I mean, I guess I've been blessed in that maybe I have a big enough platform that if I say something that comes off, I'm like, I don't care, fuck you. Like, I can get away with it. But to someone else, there's a social consequence. You'll be like, if you didn't think about it, like, how many of the like white suburban mothers that were posting black squares over BLM know anything? Like, come on, like, give me a break. It was just, but there was a fear if you didn't do that. And so you can't have a conversation. You have to caveat everything.
Do you think they're still talking about it, by the way?
No, because the whole thing was a scam. And if you're not a fucking idiot, you would have realized it was a scam from moment number one. I mean, people are now living in their Bel Air mansions. It's like, who would have thought that, funneling hundreds of millions of dollars of corporate America into something with no structure or no this. But again, if it was a conservative cause, people would be in jail. Right. There would be indictments. There would be this. Instead, it's like, well, can't do that. Like they'll use their platform to go after us as though it's sort of like the Al Sharpton model. It's like, you pay me and you won't have a protest. Like, because you're not really racist, but like, if you're not paying me, if I'm not on the payroll, you get no protection, and we'll come up with something to make you racist. I mean, it's just that on a much larger scale. And, it's scary, but they've sucked the life out of everything, which is why I hope that ordinary people can make a comeback. Because again, for me, when I go after it, they try to cancel me. When the New York Times, when they write a hit piece on me, I'm like, this is wonderful. Like it means I'm relevant and I'm making a difference and I'm on the right path. For the average person, though, they can't weather that storm. They don't feel that way. They don't get that yet. And so, how do we do that? How do we get through the failure of leadership that has allowed it to get this far, where people they're just afraid of existence?
So the Mirror, the Mirror newspaper in the UK once did an entire listicle about me, and they said the headline was, because I was in a race for UKIP leadership at the time, and it said, the 13 people and things this UKIP leadership candidate has told to fuck off. And then it just listed lots of my tweets. So I tweeted in July 2016, Obama can fuck right off. Oh wait, he is. Boris Johnson, sexism, Tories who aren't Brexity enough, that sort of thing. And so I'm confessing to be Logan Roy before Logan Roy, because that's his approach to all of this, right?
Yeah.
Is when he gets confronted with there are social consequences to your actions, and you have to do this and you have to do that. What's the answer? The answer is fuck off. Fuck off. And I understand that a lot of people don't like swearing. I love it. Yeah. I think it is an inherent part of our language, and it represents what the bold button on your Microsoft Word represents, or the
I use it like punctuation.
Right.
It's like aggressive punctuation. And by the way, just everyone knows
you're a New
watches the
Yorker
show.
And I'm a Londoner.
Yeah, I curse on here a lot. I grew up on construction sites. Perhaps it's why I'm not a total New York City dipshit. Like, my dad made me do that. He's actually been like, the two things about this show that he's like, you use your hands too much. And I'm like, I wonder where I got that. And I go, how much? He goes, like 95% too much. I go, you mean like 20x? Like that much too much? But so I use my hands too much. Again, I don't know where I get that. And he doesn't like the cursing, is even he's old school, but I'm like, but it makes the point. Like, we have to do this. If the other side, cursing, if that's a problem and the other side chopping children's genitals off isn't, then fuck, man. We got a bigger problem we got to worry about, because we are playing way different games, and that's probably true anyway.
Yeah, look, I think it's about using it sparingly. But here's why I raise it, is that is kind of, whether you vocalize it or not, that has to be our approach to these ideas, right? It's not that we're going to sort of slice very thinly away at your ideas. No, we are going to reject them outright. We are going to aggressively reject your stupid ideas with prejudice, with extreme prejudice. We will reject stupid ideas. I am prejudicial against stupidity. I am, right? That's just what I do in my life. I'm prejudicial about the cereal I buy. I don't like ones with metal shavings in them. I don't like political philosophies that are going to kill us all, right?
Yes, and that doesn't make you racist. As I say, I hate everyone. I hate everyone equally, Raheem. That's it. That's what the world has taught me, to hate everyone equally, because everyone probably deserves a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the counterpoint to that is something I've been thinking of, and it's something that stood out to me at Mar-a-Lago in the announcement speech, right? Which was somebody somewhere at the end of the end of the speech is always "Make America Strong Again, Make America Safe Again." Somebody put "Make America Glorious Again," and then "Make America Great Again." And it's jarring, and it doesn't fit, and it doesn't flow, but it works so well, because glory is better than greatness. And I just keep picturing in my head every day, the counterpoint to the sweary, angry conservative is the conservative that seeks glory and is a happy warrior, right? So the red MAGA hat with tall white lettering that just says glory etched in gold. And I think that's what we're really seeing here, right? It's gone from being a political battle to being a spiritual battle. And that brings me right back to why I went to New York and why I think those New York young Republicans did what they did.
Those guys are great, by the way. Like, for living, and I spoke at their conference this year. They're like, hard to believe. They're like the most MAGA of like the MAGA sort of groups out there. And
they throw a hell
they're
of a
in New
party.
York City. Just, it's not like, hey,
Right.
you're in South Texas and it's pretty MAGA, like, or whatever it may be. Like, that's a rough place to be pretty MAGA. And those guys were awesome. I mean, watching the idiot protesters when I walked in there, like, like the three guys regurgitating some ridiculous soundbite, couldn't deliver it. It's like they're trying to read from a script as they're yelling at me walking into the building. Was pretty epic. But that group almost made me seem liberal, which is not an easy task to do.
They're great. They really are great. And they throw a heck of a party. And, they've grown that organization from 80 members 3 years ago to I think it's over 1,100 dues paying members every year now. And it's amazing because they do politics and they do activism and things like that, but they also do like work in the community. Yeah. They raise, we raised $30,000. I did the Tunnel to Towers 5K run last year with them, and we raised about $30,000 from that. They're talking about doing the climb up the Freedom Tower this year. We'll obviously do the 5K again at the end of this year. It's amazing. That's what sort of institutions need to be being built all across the country. And I was so heartened to hear this week that the DCYRs were subject to a hostile takeover by some of the most MAGA people I know. So it is catching. It's contagious.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, talk about that. Obviously, the big news of the week, you were up in New York this week, is sort of this, Alvin Bragg. He's going to indict Trump. When, even the Washington Post is like, I don't know, man. It seems like it's sort of, again, the Amazon Jeff Bezos owned Washington Post is like, this seems to be on shaky legal grounds. And they've been trying to get Trump for 8 years, and they're going to now get him on this, Stormy Daniels nonsense when he already won in court. And I believe Stormy Daniels is paying his legal fees. And, what's going on? Like, what are your thoughts as that, both as someone who's in the DC sort of political sphere, but also someone coming at it from an outsider's perspective, that this is going on in America in 2023?
Look, I have to be a little callous about it, given that it's going on to your family. But I have to say I'm delighted because this returns him to the Oval Office. This level of persecution, even the most hostile polling, bears out the fact that most people think this is political. It's politically motivated. It's unfair. It's dragging out of things that have already been heard in court. They've already had their day in court. The people have already made the claims. They've been tossed out a million times. And they're bored of it, quite frankly.
Because let's not forget, the feds who pushed the Russia collusion saw this and decided there wasn't enough for them to pursue it. So this fat New York district attorney, George Soros funded, I guess, that's a dividend that's paying back for George Soros and his funding. But he's going to pursue it. But the feds who've been trying to throw Trump in jail for 8 years were like, there's not enough here. This is bullshit. I mean, kind of amazing.
Right. And now they're saying, but Bill Barr tossed it out and he shouldn't have. But hold on a minute. 10 minutes ago, you were telling me that Bill Barr was ragging on Trump, in some speech. Which one is it? Was he for or against? Is he, it doesn't make sense on the face of it. And you start to realize why major corporate media networks now cycle out their anchors every few years. It's not because they got old or haggard or unpresentable or suddenly forgot how to present the news. It's that you can only have the same face lying to you over and over again for a particular period of time before you stop listening to it, right? And so they have to cycle the anchors out and cycle the voices out and all of that stuff. And that's what we're seeing now. Listen, the interesting parts of this are not even necessarily what Alvin Bragg and the obviously, Soros-driven machine is doing. They're doing the things that are predictable, right? The interesting part is the response from the Republican candidates. And I was sickened by the Florida governor's response over the last week. And I don't care if you're in a primary against this guy, and I don't care if you're insulting him and you're stealing his donors and he's stealing your donors and you're insulting each other and blah, blah. I don't care. When push comes to shove, you look at the record of the person, you look at the fact that you put Pitbull Trump defender in your advert to get reelected. Well, where's the Pitbull now? And here's the problem. He did the Ukraine stuff 1 week. And then all of the establishment Republicans, the country club money bore down on him and said, you can't do that. It's not right. The Wall Street Journal is going to hit you and all of this stuff. And then this thing comes up and he thinks to himself, or somebody tells him to think to himself, oh, well, I can't upset my donors twice in 2 weeks, so I can't take Trump's side on this. Because I hesitate to believe that for a second he thinks this is the right thing to do. If he does think this is the right thing to do at this time, oh my God, it says far worse things than if he's just a sellout.
Yeah, and then to double down and sort of go on Piers Morgan, that's what was scary to me. Because like I said, I want what's good for America. I mean, I want Joe Biden to succeed if that means it's going to be good for America in his future. I don't believe anything they're doing even remotely resembles that. But that's what was scary about it. Like, he sort of went, maybe not all in Trump, like, hey, Trump's going to prevent World War III, but maybe we should figure out what's going on in Ukraine. You saw the Paul Ryan class, the warmongers, the military industrial establishment, the billionaire donor class. Like, you can't do it. And it was like, oh, well, now we go, like, because this was like a no-brainer. Like, if you can't, when you're being outflanked by like Tom Emmer and, rhinos in Congress, if you're being outflanked, and I don't think he's this way, but a lot of people would say Kevin McCarthy, if you're being like aggressively outflanked on an issue of like weaponizing the government against your political opposition by like any of those, old school members of Congress, like that's a serious problem. And if you don't know, or even don't have perhaps the political instinct to like, hey man, guys, like you gotta let me fight this one. I get it. They're beholden to a lot of people, but I'm like, holy shit, that was really scary. Like, give us, more, because that was, like I said, I want a deep bench. Like, I don't see it yet, unfortunately, in the conservative side because exactly of that, right? Too many people need their donors. They need that political class, and those guys are not the same as the everyday and then people have attacked me for doing it, but I was like, guys, I've shut up. I've been quiet. Like, Trump attacked DeSantis 2 months ago. I go, listen, like, there's been paid influencers on that team attacking Trump for the last year and a half, like building up this, sort of momentum. But, when you get put on the stage, when you get put on the spot, there is a difference between having sort of a paid influencer, what I always say, like dunking on some local reporter who's not capable of coming back and then making it go viral in the internet and like not understanding a fundamental issue of our time and hitting back and attacking.
Yeah, in terms of understanding all of this stuff, timelines are very important. People will say, oh, Trump attacked DeSantis, but like DeSantis's like newfound donor pals, in the form of like Citadel and all of that class, went and pre-briefed Politico before the midterms, right? Yeah. How do I know this? I asked the Politico reporter whose byline it was under when the interview took place, and she happily told me. So I went through the timeline. I was like, oh wait, so the Trump attack on DeSantis actually came after Trump would have got word that DeSantis's donors were pre-briefing against him ahead of the midterms. Yeah. And people don't understand this. They go, oh, Trump started it. He didn't start it, but he will finish it. But the other part of that timing, very important. When did the DeSantis interview with Piers Morgan occur? It occurred 2 hours after he got up on that stage and flubbed, right? And whiffed in front of the whole world on this issue. It was a cleanup interview, but you'd never do a cleanup interview with Piers Morgan. This is where the people around him are committing political malpractice. You don't do a cleanup interview with Piers Morgan because Piers Morgan sensationalizes everything. Yeah,
that's it. He came from a tabloid background, and I have a good relationship with Piers. Like, it's fine.
If you want to get something on the record,
it's fine, but it's not where I'd go to like.
No.
Yeah, like again, you can't fix political instinct with an influencer, right? It doesn't work. Those are those moments when it's like, crap. And again, a guy like me is disappointed to see that because I want to believe that we have a deeper bench than unfortunately we have.
Talented, thoughtful campaign people are few and far between, and they have to be, unfortunately, as a mechanism of that job, they have to be relatively serious people. They have to be people who like to sit in front of data and lots of words and history books and learn lessons and so on and so forth. And they have to be people who you tell like, that doesn't sound like a good idea. And their first reaction isn't to throw everything off the table and say, how dare you question my expertise? They have to be people who go, okay, tell me more about why you don't think that's a good idea. And those people are so few and far between, not just in politics, but in life, right?
100%. Well, the other problem is with that is like you have this sort of, consultant class.
Yeah,
right.
That's what
Remember,
I mean. That's what
they don't make millions of dollars. Don't forget, they're getting 10 to 20% on an ad buy. So if you would see a commercial, someone's making 20% just for placing it there. If you see an ad in a paper, if you see a TV hit, if you see this, what people don't understand, and I know because these guys have tried to get me to run. There's so much money in this game that the people giving you advice, like, they may not even give you, if the best advice is to sit out, well, then they make no money that cycle because Trump's not hiring them. Right. And so you create this thing where they don't even have a choice but to try to differentiate you. But if you don't have the sort of the strength, the will, the skill, instinct to push back against that, you go along with it blindly. And that's perhaps why we are where we are, because no one's actually willing to say what they really think because they're beholden to that. It's not just the donor class, it's the consultant class. And again, they're going to push you to run whether you're the right guy to run or not. We couldn't get any of these guys to work for us in 2016 because they were like, Trump's got no chance. I got to stick with the guy that's going to pay me the longest, Jeb. And so, I see the same people that were, 100% Jeb, whether it's the Paul Ryans of the world, the Karl Roves of the world, like they're all on Team DeSantis. And that has to tell you something these days.
Yeah, I that was what really set me off with it. I first interviewed him as a congressman in 2015, and I looked at, I didn't know who he was when the producer told me he was on the line. I said, I don't know who you've booked here. Just a run-of-the-mill congressman, right? Yeah. And he comes on and I pull him up on Wikipedia and I'm looking at his history and his background and his family. And I said to him, I don't know if it was on air or if it was in the break or something. I said to him, you look like presidential material to me. So maybe I'm to blame for that idea in his head. Yeah. But he did, right? He looked the part. And the problem is every time now that you hear from him, he sounds less and less like the part. It sounds more defensive and squirrely. It sounds more nasal, and it sounds so much more like Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan than anything I've heard in a very long time.
Yeah, listen, I think there's a component of that too. You got to, some of it has to be natural, right? Everyone can deliver a soundbite, but like if you're sort of delivering a contrived soundbite, it's not interpersonal. With Trump, whether you like him or not, at least it was like, hey, you knew that was Trump. That was him off the cuff.
Right.
It never sounded rehearsed, right? It was always like, hey, that's the guy. And maybe that's what we need is the guy that will say what he's actually thinking, not what the polling comes back and not what the consultant class tells him he says he has to do. His polling was, gathering 25,000 people in a room and listening to the applause, be like, oh, okay, we got to hit that because our people want that. Not a guy that's going to make money lobbying against that really wants that. So let's make sure that's what's actually a priority.
And by the way, all of these people, because some of them are my friends, right? And they've found their way over to the other side. And they always say to me, oh, but don't you think that Trump should have questions to answer about Fauci and the pandemic? Like, yes, obviously all politicians have questions to answer about everything that happens, right? Like that's what a primary season is for. That's what interviews are for. That's what all of this stuff is for. Like, obviously I think that. What a nonsense place to start the conversation, right? Don't you think a politician should be accountable? Yes, I live in the Western world. I do believe that, very basic precept. So that's what we're going to have. But what we can't have is a situation where, you don't just have a political opponent on stage with you, hurling these things against you. At the same time, you have 16, 17, 20, 25 different legal cases that the state is bearing down on you. And you have all of this stuff. Yeah, it's so far beyond the nonsense of like, there's no precedent for this. People go, oh, in 2000, this thing happened with the hanging chads and all that stuff. It's so far beyond people's comprehension, like how deep some of this rabbit hole goes. Even I'm no fan of Fox anymore, but even what Fox is going through between State Street Capital and Dominion and all of this stuff, it's insane. And it takes every second of every day to keep up to date with it, right? Like that's why people like me that's why I have a job, is because AI can't do what I could do, right? Which is go through things and pick out the signal from the noise. And all I can say is God bless you, man, and God bless your family, because I'm an observer on the outside and I'm exhausted.
Well, but you're doing it. I mean, I always talk about like people are like, so what can we do? I'm like, it's sort of, I always talk about sort of the parallel economy. We have to sort of fight back because they've weaponized everything against us. You've done that, with National Pulse. You've done that with, Human Events. Talk about what that's like, because again, even conservative mainstream media is not necessarily for MAGA. You can see that in the influence and what they push. And, I think the notion of the sort of counter institution is so important. It's such a part of our life, but that's not easy, right? Because you're not just up against the other side. They did this with Trump, right? It wasn't Trump versus Democrats while he was president. It's Trump versus Democrats. Then you have the noise of Russia, Russia, Russia. Then you have an impeachment hearing. Then you have the yada, yada. They try to hit you from all sides. And if you can sow a little bit of doubt, if a conservative is wondering, well, and I was guilty of this myself. I sort of was, I was like, I don't think Mike Flynn would have done any of these things, but if the CIA and the FBI is saying this in 16 and 17, like, well, there's got to be something to it. No, there does not have to be anything to it. Like, get that out of your minds. But it's hard as an American to fathom that. So talk about, how you've done that, how you've grown those institutions, and how so many other Americans have to do that and support these things. Because I truly believe if we don't, we're just become this sort of unified corporate Borg that just goes where it is. And, and again, that's a critique of our side as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, our approach is very much, our approach to media is very much the British approach to the world, which is we are small, but we punch large, right? We punch way beyond our weight. If I were to tell you the annual budget for the National Pulse, you would never believe it. I mean, it's tiny, it's minuscule. Even in comparison to conservative organizations, It's tiny, it's minuscule. It's a boutique, right? Like we don't do everything. We do some things very well. And so that's one very important part of it. Like, I'm a political news junkie who 9 times out of 10, I mean, this from relatively recently, people try and get me to leave the house to have dinner, and I'm like, yeah, but I'm like reading 15 different articles right now, and I got an audiobook on in the background, and like I'm just consuming as much information and making as many abstractions as possible. So you've got to specialize. But I'm a news junkie who now also has to be like a tech innovator. Like, I'm now trying to develop technology that keeps me from getting canceled versus all of these other things.
Because build your own isn't really build your own. It's build your own, and we're going to put up every imaginable roadblock to prevent you from actually building your own. We had that with True Social. We have that, I did that with MXM News, and then our bank cancels, and it takes forever to get on an app store. And then you gotta, you're sort of always beholden to them. And so then Rumble, obviously doing this podcast on there, it's like finally now a place that can't get canceled. I could have built up a big following on YouTube like I have on my other social channels, but I don't want to say what I believe and be canceled the next day. And more importantly, I don't want to build up a following and then have to whitewash what I want to say, because I'm going to offend one person and then it's all gone and I'm off. Because build your own was bullshit. They don't want you to build your own. It's not about trying to compete a little bit. It's like, well, we're going to do totally unrelated roadblocks and prevent you from doing it at all costs to make sure that the DNC talking points are the gospel. And that's it. And so, I mean, talk about that. What have you seen and faced with that?
Yeah, look, my life is nowhere near where I want it to be in terms of I wish I could just read and write all day long. Those are my passions, right? And nowadays I have to be like, liaising with this system that we use on the site that builds memberships. And they're telling me that actually, the financial thing that they use, Stripe, might have this problem with some of the things we publish. And so that, it's nonsense. Yeah. It's nonsense. Yeah. And so these are the things that, the administrative things, the boring and the tedious things, I think, that people have to, you have to realize it's a grind. Like, every day is a grind. You're always trying to just advance the football that little bit, right? I ticked these things off today. And then on the other side, I like to surround myself with as many sources as possible. Like, I will read The Guardian and The Independent and The New York Times, almost more than I will read Breitbart or Human Events or Post Millennial, National Pulse, or anything like that, right? Because knowing your enemy is so much more important.
I used to subscribe to The Atlantic, but then they totally lost their mind, so I don't even care what they have to say
I just
anymore.
got the new one here. It's nonsense.
God.
I mean, they may as well print it on rolling paper at this point.
It's really, by the way, like, it's impressive. It's almost like, it's literally like the National Lampoons of leftism at this point, where it's like, let's take, like, I could write their articles with perfection, just lampooning, ridiculing what they're probably going to say on a take. And, I guess we could do that about a lot of things. But like, while we have sort of a policy nerd on there, let's talk foreign policy for a second. Like, what is there a Biden doctrine? Or is it just, does it matter? Because when you have sort of the full force and effect of corporate media and big tech just, let's say covering for you, do you even have to have one, or can you just go on a world stage and not care?
Yeah, I think there definitely is a Biden doctrine. It's very much an unchanged Biden doctrine from when it was the Obama Biden White House. It is go down and get rich on the way down. It's self-enrichment at the cost of the nation. I was thinking about this yesterday. You think about every conflict. I was in Ukraine, in Kiev during the Maidan Revolution in 2014, by the way, and I saw all of that change in government take place firsthand. And I saw John McCain stand up on stage with a known neo-Nazi, and I predicted, and I was working for Nigel just shortly after, and I told him that if we continue on that way, there will be war in that region in our lifetimes. And look what we have. It was completely unavoidable because of the EU's policy, because of NATO's policy, and yes, obviously, I shouldn't need to say this, because of Russia's policy too. But that just for the people that will say, oh, he's apologizing for Putin.
I was an apologist for being like, wait a minute. So NATO wants to move the border of NATO.
Right.
500 miles closer, right onto Russia's border after let's call it a 50-year no man's land, a 50-year stalemate. I'm like, I don't know, man. Again, I'm not apologizing for Putin, but who's the aggressor?
What did you think would happen? That's all.
Yeah.
What did you think would happen? It's just that everybody go, oh yeah, that's fine. We're just going to take that nonsense, and it wouldn't work in the other way. But the Biden doctrine, is the Obama doctrine, right? Except that Biden's more interested in the self-enrichment side of it for him and his family. The Obama, I'm not saying Obama wasn't interested in self-enrichment, but Obama is more of an ideologue, right? Obama was more interested in actually materially changing the United States. He would say for the better, we would agree for the worse, but for the foreseeable future. Change the way the executive branch works, change the way politics is done from a local level right up to the corporate state level. It's not just the state level now, it's the corporate state level. And you look at Ukraine, and you look at Iraq, and you look at Afghanistan and the drawdown, and you look at Libya, and you look at Syria, and you look at Hillary Clinton's Arab Spring and all of that stuff. And everything the world is going through now was an entirely foreseeable consequence of what was effectively a poor man's neoconservatism, right? The neocons, at least at first, told you, okay, we're going to invade that country, and then we're going to take their stuff to pay for the invasion. The ideological the Obama class was like, well, we're going to keep invading that country, but we're not going to take anything, and we're not going to, we're just going to spend your money, trillions of dollars of your money, hard-earned money, and pouring it into waste and into democracy building programs and all this stuff, and things that never panned out at all, by the way.
And wouldn't if you had an even basic understanding of the region, right? It sounds nice on paper, but it's never going to happen. But
and that's why they've moved the region, right? They've moved the region.
I'd like your opinion on this, though, because I agree with everything you're saying, except for I actually think that, perhaps Joe Biden's been much more effective than Obama in doing those things, in the sense that at least Obama sort of had the political instinct or the sense to not, he believed all these things, he wanted to do all these things, but he wasn't going to risk his political legacy destroying the economy to do so. I feel like in Joe Biden, they have sort of the useful idiot who will sign whatever they put in front of him, clearly doesn't have an understanding of it. Clearly, even if there was a time where maybe he did have an understanding, which I'm not sure there ever was, clearly doesn't today. So I sort of feel like he's been a very useful pawn furthering that legacy far more effectively than Obama ever could, simply because he's willing to sign anything they stick in front of him, and they're more than happy to destroy his legacy because they don't give a shit.
Yeah, but all you're talking about is the fact that Obama didn't want to, Obama wanted to have a legacy as president, and Joe Biden doesn't know he's president. That's effectively what it comes down to.
Yeah. I guess that's right. Well, listen. So, I actually think for the first time in modern times, people on our side, the conservative side, we're actually probably winning the war of ideals. I think people are more with us, but I don't think it's panning out in elections. Talk to us, your thoughts on what we have to do to actually win elections. Meaning, I don't think, the moderate Democrat who still exists, has no representation in government, but who still exists in America, thinks, the trans, 3-year-olds making permanent decisions is the issue of our time, as we've been told by the Democrats. What do we have to do to actually win at the ballot box, where they weaponize COVID to do mail-in balloting? They're much more shrewd than us in the way they play the game. We want, paper ballots on the same day, and we want, IDs, and like all that stuff is wonderful, but you can't do that until you actually win. Right now, they've got to lay the battlefield. What do we have to do to stop falling behind in those issues? Because again, I actually think we're winning on the issues these days, but it's not panning out at the ballot box the way we'd want it to. You can win a local election, but national is becoming almost impossible.
Well, I mean, your father wouldn't like me saying this, but we have to stop being so fucking nice. We do.
It's hard to believe. He's the nice guy. Remember, he was the guy who was going to start World War III. He wants peace, and now he's the nice guy. So I'll take it.
Yeah, no, he's the nice guy who doesn't like swearing, and I'm saying we have to stop being so fucking nice. I just think, in the year 2000, there was a contentious election in America, and a lot of people remember it for the sensationalized tabloid elements of the hanging chads, right? But what people forget quite easily is there were a lot of votes that were swayed by the way that machines were deployed, especially in Floridian counties. And in certain counties of certain demographics, the machines would just suck up the ballot, even if it had an error in it, and it would dispose of it the way it would dispose of it, disqualified, whatever. In other demographic counties, the machines would take the ballot, see that there was an error, spit it back out at the person who filed it and said, you're going to want to correct these errors, otherwise we're not going to be able to count your ballot. And it was cheating, right? It was low-level cheating, but it was cheating. And it was cheating in favor of the Republicans in those counties. And we have to remember that we know how to cheat too. If that's the way you want to play it, then we're going to do things too. And we're going to have our, buddies who are billionaires buy up the hedge funds that own the companies that make the machines too. And we're going to ballot harvest too. And we're going to do all of these things that fine.
We have to play the same game. We can't be, we can't be watching and playing. We're playing T-ball while they're playing hardball.
Right, but we have principles. We've laid out those principles. They've told us they don't care about the principles. They don't care about a fair fight. Fine, okay, fair fight's off, gloves are off, everybody's cheating. Okay, and to be honest with you, if people look back through most American elections, most elections in the West, most are not completely clean, right? Most have elements of jiggery pokery going on here or there. And so it's about leaning back into those things. The second part that occurs to me, which is, that's practically speaking. The second part is philosophical and is spiritual, right? Like I say, glory is better than greatness. And there's a lot of people out there in America at the moment who don't identify with the word great. They're too young, maybe even, to remember in America that they think of as truly great. They think maybe even it's made up because that's what their teachers tell them, right?
Well, they've been told that from the age of 3. So yeah, it's hard. You're getting them back when they can vote at 18 or 20 after 15 years of indoctrination. That's not easy to overcome.
So how about we talk about something other than greatness? How about we talk about glory? Most of these TikTok people, like, young people, influencer types, whatever, if you say, hey, we're going to have a great time, whatever. If you tell them, no, it's going to be glorious, they'll be like, all right, like, it's going to be glorious, right? And I think there's something different, not just obviously through the verbiage there, but there's also something, it's an appeal to something different. This isn't about politics. This is about good versus evil. This is about right versus wrong. And it's not like, you can't toss it away and say, oh, no, these people don't care about that. They obviously do, because, we're at a point, and I don't like this, by the way, so don't think I'm endorsing this, but we're at a point where there are more superhero movies than ever before. There's one out like every week now, right? Marvel movies, DC, whatever, comic book movies, all this stuff. Those are right versus wrong scenarios in almost every situation. Yeah, they might do all this woke shit around it, but there are still right versus wrong scenarios. People understand that if you appeal to that at a basic level. And I think we've forgotten in politics how to do that, right? This isn't about, obviously we understand philosophically that it's about the framers and the Constitution and rights, the rights of man and all of this stuff. But if you just tell people, like the abortion argument, for instance, we don't have this argument in the United Kingdom, unfortunately. It's just the norm, right? Like abortions on demand, wherever you want them, however you want them, the government is going to pay for them. And if you present it to people on the political lines, they get very hostile. If you start presenting it to them on moral questions and moral thought, they open their minds up a lot easier. And so I think glory and triumph like that are going to be integral to this election. I think people will see it as a good versus evil election.
So, to wrap up, I agree with you, and I think that's important. And if you're looking at the sound bites, if you're looking at the hills the other side is dying on, it is almost, good versus evil. But, you can do a lot with $1 trillion and, big tech being your marketing department. But what are the issues? And I think we're winning on a lot of them right now. But what are the issues you think the right is winning on? What are the ones we have to perhaps get more on the offensive in? And, how do we overcome? How do we make sure that the average person sees that we actually have that lead in these things?
So nobody actually even knows this yet, but I am working on a book that touches on this for my third book that I'm hoping will be out before the election. It really looks at how, from a mechanism perspective, the left moves its PAC money around, its dark money around, and how that gets distributed at a local level. The front groups that start operating, pop up out of nowhere. I mean, this is BLM times a million, right?
Yeah. None of it's as organic as you're led to believe. Frankly, none of it's organic at all.
Not at all. It's a complete Potemkin village. The left has actually pretty much given up laying claim to small dollar donations now. It's all corporate money, but it's washed through PACs and all of that stuff. So that is something that people are going to have to understand if they want to know how to deploy their capital effectively in politics. And it's also something the right needs to learn how to do as well. Whenever you talk about dark money, people immediately go Republican dark money, Coke money, like all of this sort of stuff. It's nothing. It's a drop.
They have so much more. They have so much more than we have. It's like, they always talk about Sheldon Adelson. I'm like, you realize you have like 25 of them, like that I can name off the top of my head. Like we had one. Like, stop.
No, it's absurd and it's obscene, and that's one of the things that I'll be focusing on over the next couple of months as well. I think look, there's a lot of noise, and people are falling out, right, as you do during a primary season. People are falling out with their friends, they're falling out with their family members. It'll become totally the norm over the next 18 months to lose great friends that you've talked to for years and years over politics. The thing I have to say to all of those people is this. When the deal is done, when the balloons drop and the candidate is chosen, you're still going to want to be friendly with those people. You're still going to want access to those, those levers that you can pull to have an impact on the future of your country, the future of your nation. So don't make too hard enemies too quickly.
I think that's right. I saw that a lot in 2016. It was sort of interesting, man. I had guys that were texting me privately, like, I love what you're saying. I love what you're doing. And then I'd look at their Facebook page and they're like, Trump is this. I'm like, oh my God, like you're running, like, it's like a Tinder profile. You're going against Trump because that's the popular thing to do. And you're trying to pick up a chick, but like you're texting me private. And I had so much less respect for that than just saying, hey, you have a different opinion than me. That's fine. Say it. We can be friends. I grew up in New York City. I promise you, like it wasn't like it was a big bastion of conservatism. But it was that playing both sides that's far more worse, than the outright disagreement. But I do see the sort of the all in, especially in the world where, people don't realize how many people are sort of paid to play. You know what I mean? And they get picked up to represent someone right now, and they go all in because that's what they're getting paid to do that month. But then you already see, honestly, in the last week, I've had a couple of them. Hey, anything I can do on the campaign? I was like, well, dude, I've been looking at your feed for the last couple of weeks. What happened? You're a little worried. Like it's so sad when people understand how the game is actually played.
Yeah, it's a small pool of people, right? And they try and pick sides, and they usually pick the wrong side because, unfortunately, most political people are not particularly intelligent. Most political people who are hired to be sort of comm staffers or things like that, their bosses actually just really need them to write the press releases and press send. Yeah. But then they get all these highfalutin ideas about House of Cards and West Wing and all of that stuff, right? And and you've seen Veep, right? Veep is closer to what DC is actually like. Than all of these other things.
By the way, it actually feels much more like a documentary most of the time than a parody.
Yeah, that's right. And you have these strange, awkward Jonahs of the world, like always lurking around, trying to get a new job, and maybe they'll try and run for it. And that's just the way it is, right? That's politics. And I always say that's never going to change unless the ordinary, good working man and woman in this country decide, they're going to have the Mr. Smith goes to Washington stuff for themselves, Listen, I feel like the toughest guy walking down Pennsylvania Avenue, and I'm 5'8" and not particularly well built, you know.
Exactly.
But like if you see the knuckleheads who are walking down Pennsylvania
No,
Avenue,
it's amazing. Like I have a story that you're talking about, sort of the awkward donors and dealing with that. I had one of those, like, donor of ours in 16, and we win, and the first phone call like the next morning after the election. Hey, Don, my friend's 27-year-old, reasonably successful. He actually said this, reasonably successful. I guess it's his friend's daughter. She's a reasonably successful investment banker. She would like to be the ambassador to the UK, the court of St. James, like the most prestigious sort of like appointed position. Like, so I'd like you to make that happen. I go, wait. Like, you're not you. Your friend's reasonably successful investment banking daughter, who's 27, is going to go sit and occupy the court of St. James. Like, I guess we had a couple pretty famous people in that spot. Like, really? I didn't know whether to be upset or impressed at the level of balls, you know what I mean, that it took to ask these things. So it's always interesting, and people don't understand the dynamic of how crazy it sometimes gets.
Yeah, and we couldn't even get Nigel Farage as the ambassador over here, and that was and that was even we had a Trump tweet that went out in the middle of the night saying that he should have been the ambassador over here. I mean, that would have been a great relationship.
By the way, that would have been amazing, and it's still a very good relation. By the way, do you have a good Trump Farage story?
I've got so many.
Oh no, come on. Okay, I lied about last question. That's bullshit. Because come on, what? Give me like 2 or 3 good ones, because I got to just hear these, because I probably have some of them, but I don't even get all of them, because I can't keep up.
I'll just tell you, it was after seeing Trump in Vegas. And it was a room full of hostile libertarians, and they really didn't want him there. Like, most of them clearly didn't want him there. And he went on and he spoke, and about 80% of the room at the end were giving him a standing ovation. And I was like, wow, if this guy can turn these people, I gotta talk about this. So I get onto Steve, I got into Bannon about it. He's like, yeah, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then I got onto Nigel about it, and he's like, what are you talking about? I was like, I'm telling you. So that's how Nigel like really got into the whole thing. Yeah. And obviously he came over, did some speeches, Jackson, and so on and so forth. But there was a funny one a couple of months ago, where I was having lunch on the terrace at Mar-a-Lago, and my phone rings, and it's Nigel, and he wants to talk about just what's going on in America, keep me up to date. So I put my AirPods on and I walked down the stairs, and you know me, I'd had a few martinis, and I walked down the stairs and I'm at the pool, and I got my duffel bag on my shoulder, and Donald Trump walks towards me, got the Secret Service and all of that. Yeah. And I just went, oh, I got Nigel on the phone. And he goes,
couple martinis deep. What could go wrong?
He goes, Nigel, I only know one Nigel. And he grabs my phone, and I have to like press the AirPod button off. Yeah. And he just walks around the pool talking to Nigel for like the next 10 minutes. And the Secret Service like boring holes into me with their eyes. But like, he wants to talk to Nigel. So like, he's going to talk to Nigel. And it was amazing. And those two men are so similar, like obviously different, different backgrounds and, different ways that they grew up, but they're so similar in their demeanor. And when they talk to each other, because, he had him on the speakerphone. Okay. And when they talk to each other, it's just talking to themselves, right? It's amazing. I've got so many funny stories of the campaign trail and all of these things, but that was a real funny one that happened recently. And he goes,
what's a good campaign trail one? I'm curious about this one.
Oh gosh, so some of them I'm not sure Nigel would want me to tell.
Okay, that's fair. There's a statute of limitations.
They usually end up at 3 a.m. with some girl with his tie tied around her head.
Oh God. Just kidding. That obviously is a somewhat exaggeration, kind of, maybe.
No, I mean he's a great time, and Americans love Nigel, right? Because he's gregarious. He doesn't talk down to anybody. He's very much a man of the people in the very strictest sense, right? Like if you invite him out for a night out, he'll be the first one at the bar and the last one to leave. right? He's the greenest politician in the world because he's ethanol fueled. He'll start with a few gin and tonics, get onto a couple of bottles of red wine, and finish with a few pints of ale. And it's amazing to watch. The man's stamina and all of that is just incredible.
Well, those are the similarities to Trump, other than the drinking. That's got to be interesting. But I mean, Nigel's also a truly intelligent person. He just not only instinctually but also just in general, right? There's both. What are there contrasts between him and Trump? What are going to be the differences other than the drinking, obviously?
Well, I haven't worked very closely with Donald Trump ever, so I don't know. I don't know if I am getting this correct, but maybe you can give me an insight. Nigel is sort of famed for, at least amongst people who have worked for and around him, is sort of famed for being very much the life of the party, but also when he's getting down to the work, the pen and the paper comes out. The pack of cigarettes come out, the glasses come on like this. And if you even make a joke in that moment of time, he just won't even acknowledge it.
By the way, that's interesting.
Looking right now.
That's a similarity with my father. There are times where I am what I am, right? I say what I am. My personality on social is my personality. And so, something that sometimes would go over as a knee slapper with my father sometimes just gets the look
yeah. Yep.
Really? Now? Yep. And so, right. That's pretty interesting. I should have them both on the show one time and just let them go, because I think that would be that would be pretty amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's the sort of sternness, right, that they grew up with. Whereas, there is a time for play, but there's also a time for work. And I think today, probably you and I have a little bit more blurring of the lines between work and play, right? I'll happily get up now for a minute, go and do something else for a while, maybe have a run in the middle of the day, whatever. No, these were men who, when they put their suit and tie on, they went to work. They went to work, right? And they worked. It's 100%. Interesting. Different way of doing things, certainly from where we do it.
It is. Well, Raheem, I just want to thank you for being on here. I think it's a really interesting perspective. I think as other stuff, and obviously we're in the midst of the Ukraine nonsense. I mean, with your international perspective, I'd love to have you back on talking more about these things. Why don't you let everyone know where they can, even go check out, obviously, Human Events and the National Pulse. It doesn't take a genius to figure out how to find them, but let them know so that they can find them, because I think we have to all be doing our part supporting these sort of small independent organizations, help them become bigger ones. And, hope that, and I don't think it's going to happen with you, but hope that people like yourself never bastardize that, so that we can actually have objective truth out there rather than corporate fueled phony truth.
Yeah, so I don't want to misrepresent myself, by the way. My involvement with Human Events ended a few years ago, but we handed it over to Jack Posobiec and his team, and they're doing a great job. So everybody should make sure they're following over there. The National Pulse is growing this year. We're investing a lot into it. It's gonna present the news in a completely different way, and I mean physically different way. So watch out for that. We'll be moving into print as well this year, and I have a Substack where I do an occasional podcast. I like to say I hate podcasting so much that when I do one, you really have to listen to it, and that's just at raheemkassam.com. So I appreciate all the support, and listen, I appreciate the time. There are stories I can tell you once we stop recording.
There's no doubt. I got that immediately, because let's just say it's not the first time I've had someone be like, it's later, next time we're having a cigar, I want to hear that story, because I imagine it's gold, but probably not for TV just yet.
Not just yet.
Oh, Raheem, thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate it. You're the best.
Thank you, mate. Cheers. Have a good one.
Awesome, guys. I want to take the time to thank all of you for the incredible support. I also want to thank our incredible sponsors, MyPillow, Mike Lindell, great patriot, putting his money where his mouth is, supporting shows and content like this. He's been derided, he's been canceled, and he's still in the game. So go to mypillow.com/Don Jr., where you can buy one and get one free, as well as open up a whole bunch of other discounts on your favorite MyPillow products. Again, support the companies who support you and put their money where their mouth is, as opposed to putting their money to fight everything else that you guys stand for and believe. So again, mypillow.com/Don Jr. Also, check out our friends at Goldco. If you're worried about what's going on, if you're worried about your retirement savings, you can roll over things like your IRAs into gold and silver and precious metals. And our friends at Goldco can take you all through that. Go to donjrgold.com. That's DONJRgold.com. Go check them out. Learn about it. Okay? If you're concerned about what's going on in the world like I am, if you see sort of what's happening right now with the inflation crisis, with the banking crisis, with the stock market, with the insane decisions that are being made, you may want to diversify your portfolio. Do so with guys who share your beliefs, who are willing to support content like this. Go to donjrgold.com, DONJRgold.com, and support them. And again, guys, I just want to thank you for making this show a great success. I've really enjoyed doing the long form stuff. I plan on doing a lot more of it. And also, in your comments, throw up some names of other people you'd want on the show. I want to hear from you guys. I want to learn from what you guys have to say. Always going to be me, but it is important to make sure I want to give you guys the content that you're looking for, because that's what I'm doing it for, right? So I appreciate it. You guys are the best, and we will see you soon.